everybody. We're so happy you were able to join us for this month's discussion. We'll be talking about many of the topics that come with cancer survivorship. My name is Lacey, and I'm the community manager for ShadowsEdge and a part of the Digging Deep team. Throughout this webinar, I will be available to answer any questions through the chat, or we will be holding the questions until the end, depending on who they're for. So as you have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat box. And so today we're talking about what comes after cancer for many young people who have gone through cancer treatment, whether it be physically, emotionally, or mentally. So let me introduce our speakers today. First, we have the founder of the Digging Deep project, Sheri Sobrato Brisson, who is a long-term cancer survivor and mental health professional. Sheri was diagnosed with a brain tumor at the age of 24 and has been a survivor for almost 35 years now. And then we also have Katrina Starzec, who is also a cancer survivor, and she now works at the Children's Cancer Research Fund. Katrina was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at the age of 17, just before the start of her junior year of high school. And this December marks 11 years of survivorship for Katrina. And I will just pass it on to Sheri. And thank you so much, guys, for joining us. And we're so excited to have you.
Thanks, Lacey, for putting all this together. And it's just very exciting to be here to talk about not just conquering our cancer. I mean, that's just the first step, but you know, what it's really like to live with cancer survivorship. That means after, you know, the necessary treatments are finished, you know, how does cancer really affect our lives? And like you said, there's all the kind of medical, what they call late effects, which could be, you know, for every cancer survivor, it's different, but it could be things like infertility. It could be learning challenges. Some people lose part of their mobility or even all of their mobility. Then secondary cancers can crop up. Hearing loss, that's one of my things. You know, but there's a lot of things that can range from, you know, mildly irritating to, you know, significantly impairing our lives. And then there's all the personal challenges that come, whether it's new financial problems we didn't have, or job losses, or job changes, or relationship changes. That's all kind of the bad stuff. But what I really also want to talk about today is, especially with the longer and longer you get out, I think, at least for me, and Katrina, you can shed some light on this too, that there's also some benefits that you don't see right away that are the positive changes that we make in our life because we've had cancer, and how we're living life and our perspective of life and things like that. So we're here today to talk about all of it. And I wanted to start by asking you a couple of questions, Katrina. As I'm sure, since you were diagnosed as a teen, your teen years were way different than your peers. And I'm wondering if you could say something about that, how it was that you treated them, they treated you, and things like that, because I think that's something a lot of our listeners would like to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was diagnosed at 17 and I was just about to start my junior year of high school. And in high school, what was most important to me was being an athlete. So I had participated in 3 sports up until my diagnosis and was on the varsity teams for all of them. So being part of a team and being on a team and really contributing my skills was important. And then also the community component of being on a team was something I really valued as well. So when a cancer diagnosis came, almost all of my independence was stripped away. And if you are 17 and watching today, you can probably identify with, maybe you can drive a car, or you will have a later curfew, or you're growing in your independence and you don't need your parents or your caregivers to spend as much time working with you every day. And that was my case as well. I had my own vehicle, I had a job, I had a boyfriend, and when I got a cancer diagnosis, a lot of those things were taken away. So for what my life looks like to my peers was very different. My life didn't revolve around my school schedule anymore. It revolved around a 21-day chemotherapy cycle. And days 1 through 6, I was in the hospital. And then days 7 through 21, I was at home and recovering. And thankfully, I was still able to attend school, but most of my days and most of my life was just dependent on how I was feeling and what appointments needed to happen that day. So very different from what my peers were experiencing.
Well, I certainly can relate to one of the things you said, which was the loss of independence. And even though I was much older, I was 24, I was living independently. I was out of college, my first job, 3,000 miles away from my parents, and had that experience of being zapped back into family life as I had it as a kid. And there's a lot of changes that happen in the relationships. And we'll get to talking about that when we get to the relationship section of what we're talking about. But I'm wondering, because I think I've worked, both been a survivor and worked with so many survivors over the years, and everyone kind of defines that moment of survivorship different. I mean, some people say the minute they're diagnosed and they live even 1 day or 2 days and they start their fight against cancer, that's survivorship. For other people, it's when treatment's over. And for other people, it's just another different time that they decide. And I'm wondering what it was like for you.
Yeah, for me, being a survivor, I think really happened when I got my portacath out, which is a device, if you're not aware, that gets inserted just under the first layer of skin, and it's a way for the chemotherapy to be delivered. So mine was near my ribs, and when you have a portacath put in, you have to be really careful about the movements and the motions that you make.
Yeah.
So even standing up really quickly from a chair, I had to be aware of, I probably should take my time and be patient and stand up peacefully versus how I normally would stand up, which would be pretty haphazardly. So once that portacath was removed, I felt some, again, independence that was regained, but it also meant that I could return to sports, and I could return to working out more than just walking. And I could return to begin building up my strength again, to join my sport at the time, which was the basketball season. So once the port was taken out, I really felt like my survivorship had started and my life could return back to what I thought would be normal.
Well, that's
What about you, Sheri?
I think I'm one of those people that felt from the beginning, if I just could get through 1 week or 1 month. I had a pretty lousy prognosis in the beginning. And so I felt like any amount of time that I could get through it was good. And then it just, changed over time. I'm not saying change over time, and we can talk about that later, but it's, but for me, it was really early on. It wasn't really at the end of treatment. It was somewhere, because I had a long treatment course. So it was somewhere, I wanted to feel like a survivor at every step of the way.
Yeah.
So, so anyway, I know you're familiar with our game ShadowsEdge and played it some. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we designed into the game was these stages that we all go through, like we're talking about, from the beginning of when we're diagnosed to maybe the things that we lose in our life to then the rebuilding that you were talking about. And we reflected that in the game through our stages in the game, which are disruption, which is when, let's face it, we're kicked in the face in life as we know it. Bye-bye.
Yep.
To disillusionment, which is, I've gotten through the first part, I powered through it, but holy crap, what's coming next? And how do we get through that to what you were starting to talk about, which was kind of the discovery, like when can I get back to my normal life or even a better than normal life? And I'm wondering if you could talk about those stages at all, and if you went through them, and if so, if there were particular times that you remember that you were in those different stages.
Yeah, great question. So I think for disruption, obviously getting this diagnosis was a massive disruption in all of our lives. And I say all, meaning my family and friends and community. Getting cancer is not something anyone ever expects to happen, but especially being so young and being such a young person and so healthy up until that point. So absolutely, there was a moment of disruption, but I'd say that phase for me initially was really, really short. And we moved straight into this kind of disillusionment phase immediately after, because we didn't know what was going to happen next. And we just needed to keep doing the next right thing and say, okay, yep, this is the first round of chemo. Yep, this is what we do this is what we'll do when a blood clot arrives. And this is what we'll do when your counts aren't high enough and you need to go get a blood transfusion. And that period of time, it felt to me like a disillusionment phase, because there just was so much that we didn't have the answers to, and things changed every single day. And we just had to roll with those changes and respond as well as we could to them. And then I would say even disillusionment can continue to creep up today. And in thinking about my own health journey today as a survivor for 11 years, my experience with cancer is part of my health, and it's part of my life. So as I'm receiving, any type of medical treatment today, even if it's just a physical, this piece of my life is still part of it. So it's a area of life that I get to hold and remember and can't forget about. And then for discovery, I think once I've had some space from being diagnosed with cancer as a teenager, the very last thing I wanted to be remembered as or be a person who was a girl with cancer. I just thought that was going to be how my identity was held for so long. And I grew up in a really small town in Minnesota. So, everyone knew I had cancer. I was on the front page of like our local newspaper. So everyone knew that there was a girl in town who was sick and who was really struggling. And as someone who didn't really like being the center of attention, that was difficult. But I also was really tied up and worried about my identity. So I think in discovery, I, back in 17, learned that this cancer diagnosis did not define me. And that was something that I had to remind myself of every single day. And then even today, my story with cancer and my experience with cancer continues to impact the way I live and the choices I make. So I've seen all of those phases kind of pop up and not necessarily be as linear as I think if I wouldn't have had this experience, I would have assumed they would have been.
So with these different stages, did you go through different emotions, would you say? How was that sort of, you don't have to really speak to the different stages, but just that emotional roller coaster, and how, were there times that ups and downs, any times that were just smooth sailing for you too, just for a word of encouragement?
Mm-hmm. I think when I was being diagnosed, the emotions were just, we have to get through the day. We have got to get through the day and figure out what the diagnosing process is actually going to look like and what I would be diagnosed with. So ultimately, as you mentioned before, I got diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And once that was able to happen, I think honestly, my family felt a peace, which is a strange thing I think to feel, but there were so many unanswered questions. And once we were able to have one of those questions answered, a plan could then be made to move forward, and a protocol and a calendar and a schedule could be created for me to have some success and be able to be healthy. And then I think while I was being treated, there were feelings of some loneliness. Just because I spent a lot of time in the hospital. Thankfully, my mom was able to spend almost every waking minute with me, but I was pulled from school and I wasn't able to be with my friends. And again, as I mentioned, being on teams was really important to me. So that was difficult. But the relationships I would say that I've built both in the hospital and then decades later because of my cancer diagnosis have been incredible. I remember the very last day that I was treated. So my very last day of treatment, they take all the tubes out and wrap you up with some Band-Aids, and you can walk out the door and you ring the bell on the way out. And I remember this pit in my stomach of being almost a little sad that I was leaving these wonderful people that had been part of my life. I got so close with my doctors and nurses and personal care assistants, and they had been like a family to us. We spent Thanksgiving with them. My mom and I spent Thanksgiving in the hospital with these people, and I had grown to really enjoy spending time with them, even though it was during a difficult, awful time that I didn't want to be in. So learning how to hold both of those things of, I don't want to be here, I'd rather be at home, and also really enjoying the people that I was surrounded with was encouraging.
I can relate to so many things that you said, so I'm not going to repeat everything because you said it, perfectly. But one of the questions that, when you were talking about you had lost so much, and there had to be a period of sadness to let go of what was before you could then be your positive self and say, okay, now I'm going to grow and learn and redefine myself, like you were saying, or, you know, move on to the next stage. And I certainly went through that. And it didn't, it kind of, I was hit in the face with it because I actually had an unrelated medical challenge many years later. I don't think went through sort of the emotional side of things until probably 5 years after my survivorship. And I think part of that was because it was too scary to really acknowledge that maybe this big beast called cancer could come back again in my life, as I knew it could be disrupted again, or taking that next step. Like, how do we have the courage to try again, to rebuild again when, you know, frankly, it could all be taken away again. So there's that, at least for me, there was that kind of feeling like I wanted to, but at the same time being stuck because I didn't want to, because I really didn't want to be hit in the face again. So definitely know what that was like. And then some of the things that you said about, again, kind of rebuilding and changing. I mean, I remember thinking, if I could just live 10 more years. I thought that was like the longest time that I could possibly live. And I thought, well, if I could just live 10 more years, you know, what do I want this 10 more years to look like? And what kind of changes would I make in my life? Like you said, it becomes part of you, right? It's not just part of your identity, but part of your, how you make decisions, how you change and how you move forward. And for me, that was, and then that 10 years came, and I had my 10-year survivorship party. I don't know if you had one, but I certainly did. And we had, you know, African drumming music. It was really fun. And then it was like, oh my gosh, I could live another 10 years or another 10 years, or I could grow up and, you know, have kids and a whole new life. And that's the exciting part when you get to, not everybody gets that second chance. I mean, we all have that, you know, like you were saying, peace was a weird word that you would associate with your cancer experience. And for me, it was freedom. If I had to sum up one word, what my cancer experience gave to me, it was really freedom to make those choices. And all of us, I mean, it's not like we have infinite freedom in our life. Of course, there's, you know, life situations and environmental things that we have to deal with, but there's always probably more room that we give ourselves to make changes in our life and to live our life the way we want to. But the problem is, number one, we don't know what we want. So I remember when I went to this patient empowerment program, they said, well, why don't you structure your life to meet your needs? I'm like, oh, what a cool idea. What are my needs? I mean, I had no idea what that meant. I go, I don't have any needs. No, I don't know what they are. I don't know how to, you know, make changes in my life to meet my needs. And so that was kind of my aha moment, was really thinking, you know, if I did live, which I, you know, was pretty much in denial. So I was in full belief that I would live. You know, what kind of changes would I want to make in my life? And I wrote everything down in a journal, and I had all these bullet points, like, and some of the things were things I learned from a book, some things from my counseling groups that I was in, some things just from talking to people, and some things I went inside, right? And there are things that I discovered that were already there. And I wrote everything down, and it was wild. And my 30-year anniversary, I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to pull out that journal. I swear to God, I had not looked at it in 30 years. And everything that I had written down, I actually had created in my life.
Wow.
And I was really shocked. That was my big aha benefit from cancer. So anyway, let's see, what else should we talk about?
Yeah, Sheri, you mentioned just briefly about when you were diagnosed, and I know you were a little bit older than me, and I mentioned I was just starting to experience some of that independence of being an adult. I was 17, so on my way there, but you were 24 and living independently across the country from your family in a dream career, and then you got hit with cancer. And I was just wondering if you could tell me what it was like when you were brought back to your parents' house and treated for cancer away from the life that you had been creating.
Yeah, I mean, it was different. To say that. I mean, I think that we all like to make decisions for ourselves, especially as a young adult. And I think having other people in my life that had that also responsibility for me, because they're my parents or my brothers and sisters who wanted to help but didn't really know how, and everybody kind of putting in their 2 cents. And so I think that caused maybe some confusion and what I should be doing and how I should be leading my life. And I have to say, I was one of those people. What made me feel strong was, like you were saying, like sports. But my brain tumor was in the back of my head, and I had lost a lot of sense of balance. And so I couldn't do anything that I'd done before. And I remember thinking, okay, forget about trying to bike. You know, those tires are way too small. And so this is the era when mountain biking was brand new before anybody had done it. And so my dad took me to go get a mountain bike, and it had the big fat tires. I'm like, oh, cool. You know, I'm going to be able to stay on this bike and not fall off. And boom, fell off. I tried to play tennis. I put my arm out, fell over. You know, I tried then. Finally, when I kind of learned not to tip over all the time, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go back and learn how to snow ski again. And it was so depressing because I had been a good snow skier, I had been a good water skier, and then everything, boom. And so, you know, so it was kind of going through these constant just adjustments. Let's just call them adjustments. And so some of them, and my parents honestly thought I was crazy for even trying. But it was important to me. I picked up windsurfing, which is the last thing you want to do, let me tell you, if you don't have any balance. But for me, I don't care how long it took me to learn, I was going to do it. I was going to conquer the fact that I had lost my balance. And now, you know, at almost the ripe old age of 60, I am learning how to wake surf. And with my young children, we are learning together, only that I have to say they're taking to it much easier than I am. But, you know, sometimes things, the craziest things that we find that are important, that we want to still feel like we can do stuff. And I think it was a learning experience for all of us to give ourselves the space to do that. So anyway, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about, like, were there any times that you felt that people were, because we always think of, like, gosh, these cancer survivors, I mean, are like put on a pedestal sometimes. And like you were saying, you're in the paper or different things. But Leah, let's talk about the flip side. I mean, were there times when you felt there was some judgment against you or prejudice against you because of you having cancer? Or?
Good question. I think yes, certainly. Overall, I think during my experience with cancer, I had a really positive attitude. So I was also really, really sick. I think about just some of what my blood counts were and look back at photos and remember what it was like to have virtually no energy. And although I was able to put on a really happy face, and I was just a happy kid too, I think sometimes there could have been the assumption that, well, if she's happy, she's attending school, she's still going to class and doing her homework and going to football games on Friday nights, is she really that sick? I think could have been an assumption that some people made. And then two, the relationships within my family was difficult. So I'm the oldest of three. And if you look up like classic oldest sibling characteristics, I have got every single one of them in spades, much to my siblings' annoyance at times, I'm sure. And I think there was an attention that was focused on me, and rightfully so. I mean, I was fighting for my life. I had cancer. I needed chemotherapy treatments every 3 weeks. And I know it was difficult for my siblings. They obviously wanted me to feel better and wanted me to be okay and survive. And they wanted their lives back, and they wanted their lives to go back to normal too. So I think in some ways the judgment or the prejudice maybe existed, but maybe it was just perceived in my head. But I know it was a difficult time for my whole family because my siblings wanted our lives to go back to normal. My parents were trying to continue to work and provide for our family. And they also had a child going through one of the scariest things anyone could possibly go through.
Yeah, no, it's not that cancer just happens to the cancer patient. Of course, we all hear, you know, really it happens to the whole family, and siblings included. And it was no different in my family, who my younger sister was just starting college, and she took a semester off just so she could be with me to go through this patient empowerment program that I went to. And, you know, I mean, I think over time, there's always been, you know, now that I have the long-term perspective of 35 years, you know, I made different choices in my life than my sister has. And that's always going to be a difference. And because I've taken the freedom, like we were talking about, to do what I've wanted to do. And made different choices about what I think feeling productive is or important is. And I think that, that can cause tension when somebody goes like a more traditional route, probably the same route I was on before I got sick. And I just thank God, that I had cancer in my early 20s where I could make changes and decisions and alter my course and all of that. But one thing that you said that really rings true to me is that kind of need, or maybe you didn't have, I certainly did, was to feel strong for not just myself, like being the star patient and all this stuff, because I thought I was supposed to be positive and everything, and I wanted to be the best patient I could be. But it wasn't just being strong for me, it was actually taking care of everybody else, at the same time, like not wanting to maybe express things that I would express because I felt like I didn't want to worry anybody. I didn't want to upset anybody because everybody else seemed to be doing fine. So I should probably pretend like I'm doing fine too. And so you're shaking.
I so identify with that. I was treated as a pediatric patient being 17, but in the room next door, there was a 3-year-old boy who had just had his leg amputated from a bone cancer. So I would look at our situations and at the time at 17, think, oh my gosh, I have it so much better off than this 3-year-old does. And I've gotten to live such a long life, and this 3-year-old is missing a leg. And there was certainly some feelings of guilt that bubbled up in those moments. And I think too, wanting to be able to put on a brave face for family members and friends. And a lot of people don't know what to do when they're faced with someone else having a difficult time, whether that be in death or grief or a diagnosis or a job loss. We don't always have the right words to say. So I recognized that as a 17-year-old and wanted to make sure people didn't have to be put in that situation. So I would make things better and try and maybe not communicate what I was going through to the level of which I wish I would have now looking back.
Yeah, I mean, what you say about guilt is so true because like I had a type of brain cancer that nobody had survived from before. And then I survived, right? So I shouldn't, and like I said, I was in denial of my feelings for many years. I mean, not just one, but quite a number before, they started bubbling to the surface. And, why should I feel sad? Or why should I feel angry about what happened to me and about having, my life kind of taken away from me like that, grabbed away from me, when my situation wasn't that bad. And I because I got better, and it was weird that I felt that guilt too. Like, am I not allowed to have these feelings because I was one of the lucky ones? And so I definitely know what it's like there. So I'm curious, I got married much after my situation, a good 15 years later, and you're somewhat recently married. Congratulations. We're going to talk about that. And I'm just kind of wondering if if you're willing to, talk to us about how that, meeting your husband, telling your husband that you had been sick, if you didn't already know, if you hadn't read those articles in the paper about you, just what was that like? Because I think that's a big step that a lot of kids and young adults go through. Eventually they go on to live their life, and now the survivorship is so much more. I mean, some cancers are 90% survivorship. And so lots of people are going to be right there. And I'd love you to help share with the audience, both the professionals listening and the young people themselves. What was that like?
Yeah, good question. So I was, as you mentioned, just married recently. We got married in May, but I'll hop back even years ago. I would say within any relationship that I had, my experience with cancer came up. It's just part of my life. It is part of my the way I make decisions. It's part of the way I live. And a lot of that has to do with how I frame looking at the world. And I came really close to not being able to be a 28-year-old having this conversation today. So I think my philosophy and many areas of my life are framed because I had this life and death encounter at such a young age. So within lots of relationships, and especially any type of romantic relationship, it for sure came up. But my husband and I met, 6 years ago, and we met at a summer camp, and we were camp counselors in college and working with teenagers in a summer camp in Georgia. So we got to know each other and became really close friends there. And he learned of my story, and I learned about his life through that experience. And really, it was just as friends for a very long time. I had a crush on him like the third day I met him, but we didn't start dating until many years later. So he had been aware of my experience with cancer, but once we started a relationship, it became a more important conversation to have. We started dating and then knew that we wanted to spend the rest of our lives together and get married and ultimately build a family. Having children and being able to build a family was really important to the two of us. And it was a conversation we needed to have, and to just be aware of that. I did the math the other day, and almost 1,000 hours of chemotherapy and treatments while I was sick. So there was a chance that I wouldn't be able to have children, and we were not going to be able to conceive children. And it's actually another conversation that my parents even had. My dad had cancer right after my parents had gotten married, and the doctors told them that they were not going to be able to have kids. So many years later, there are a few of us, my siblings and I. So it's a conversation I had honestly been prepped for because of hearing my parents talk about it, that they wanted children, they wanted to build a family, and if they weren't going to be able to do that biologically or naturally, then they would look into adoption. And that's a conversation that my husband and I had to have as well. And ultimately, we wanted to be with each other and build a family with each other. And we would welcome children in whatever way they would be able to join our family as well.
And so now,
You're
having a baby. Congratulations.
Having a baby. Yes.
So tell us about what that's like, and if it brought up any kind of new feelings for you that you might not have had before, other than excitement and total fright, oh, holy crap, what am I doing?
A lot of those feelings. So in full transparency with a bunch of wonderful strangers who get to know about my life, I anticipated really struggling to get pregnant, just with my medical history, and I just really thought we would struggle to get pregnant. So we started trying shortly after we got married, and it did not take long. So I am halfway through a pregnancy, and things are going very, very well. And I think some of those feelings and emotions of, we're first-time parents, so we have no idea what we're doing, and there's feelings of, can we do this? What are we doing? How are we going to make this all work? It's certainly there, but I think the feeling that I am most overwhelmed with most of the time is just a deep gratitude. I love and adore my husband, and he is going to be a wonderful father. And I'm excited that we get to do this together and really be partners in raising a child together. But then also just gratitude that I even get to experience this and can feel what a life inside me feels like, and be able to be part of this really special piece of life.
Yes, it's great. I mean, I still, as you know, have relatively young children, are young teens, and I didn't get married until I was 41, and I had my kids at 44 and 47. Now that is a world record, I think I hold. But what was amazing was when I was in my 20s, I really thought that getting married was the end of my life as I knew it. I was out having fun doing all this stuff, and I saw my other friends, every weekend working on their house or going to Home Depot, whatever. I'm like, oh no, I don't want this. Yep. And I wasn't ready. And so I had a lot of time that I felt like I needed to just have fun and enjoy life, and also pursue my dreams, which was to become a counselor and to, go back to graduate school, to, work on my home and, myself. I wanted to do that for myself.
Yeah.
And I think I needed that. But, at the same time, when I tell my story, what was exciting was there wasn't a lot of options had I had my family in my 20s. It took a good 20 years of medical science to catch up to help people like us, or me, because I wasn't in your category. There wasn't any possibility because it was before egg freezing and, all of that. And I was told when I was 24, I mean, literally, as they were giving me my first dose of chemo, I mean, seriously, it was at that moment that they said, well, this is going to affect your fertility, but it's more important that we save your life, isn't it? I mean, it wasn't even a discussion like what I want that, but it was, but whatever. So I had lived with that throughout my dating career, a career dating, but to kind of avoid the whole issue, I specifically dated, which is kind of funny. My family would probably agree with, not my current family, my family of origin would agree with this. I only dated people that I thought I would never marry, which would particularly if your strategy was not to get married,
Yeah, that's a great strategy if you don't want to get married.
At some point I'm like, okay, maybe it's not such a bad thing. Maybe if you meet the right person, then it becomes like what you're describing with your husband. It becomes this partnership and you can build on your dreams together. And what was interesting is I didn't meet that person until I was 40. I got married at 41 and, had the same conversation, like, are you okay with adoption or other sorts of strategies? Because I really didn't know, but fortunately for me, IVF with donor egg, which is what I needed, it was still at the cusp. It was in the beginning stages of donor. You couldn't really get them very easily. And especially because I lived in France at the time, because my husband's French, I'm like, oh God, how am I going to do this? And I just thought, well, in the first, it wasn't an easy course. I had 2 miscarriages along the way. So I married my laundry too here with everybody. But, I said, okay, I'm going to try one more time. And they said, well, it's not you. They kept saying that it's not you, it's your donor. Go out and get yourself a new donor. And I found my donor on the internet. I swear to God, I have these like little IVF babies that I got to carry. So I got to have that experience, who are as much mine as any kid could ever be. And, I'm an older mom and it was kind of funky, going to kindergarten class that first day of preschool or kindergarten. And, but fortunately there were other older moms there too. I wasn't one. I live in the Bay Area, so that made it easier. And even in France, where all the moms are like in their 20s and early 30s, there's still somebody older than me in my son's preschool class. And it's just been a really fun ride. And I just encourage you to embrace like every second, because I think when you've gone through something like we have, you probably embrace every second anyway, but it's been the best thing ever. And, like you said, it doesn't really matter, because I'm sure there's people listening that have different kinds of options. And all I would like to say is that there's many ways to build that family. And if they're all equally acceptable to someone, like to have those children that you want to raise. To be part of your family, then there's so many more options than if people have, one particular idea of how to have that family. So anyway, congratulations again. I'm just thrilled for you.
Thank you.
So I'm kind of wondering, is there a time, so you're over the 10-year mark now, that you were kind of over cancer, or like you said, or is it just that you live with the fact that you have had this changed identity in your life?
That's a good question. I think for me, it was so early on. Again, I think about being a teenager and just being so wrapped up in other people's perceptions of me and how people would remember me. And I wanted to go through treatment, get better, get my port taken out, and never to talk about cancer again. That would be my preferred way. That would have been my preferred way to navigate the rest of my life. There were these bracelets and t-shirts and wonderful things that people had made for me, and it was so thoughtful and so wonderful, and a lot of the proceeds supported my family. And for me, I just wanted it to be over. So I would say early on, I was over cancer and wanted it to be over as fast as humanly possible and forgotten like it never had happened. But now, years later, in the work that I get to do at Children's Cancer Research Fund, I see how integrated my story with cancer has been. And I get to work with incredible individuals and families all across the country who want to support safer and better treatments for childhood cancer. And I get to do that work, and I'm thrilled that I can share my story with a lot of these people who also have a connection to childhood cancer. So I would say I was over it very, very early, and then came around to being more open and willing to have cancer be part of my story, probably in college.
So now that you work with the Cancer Research Fund, was that something you expected to happen, or is it something that you sought out, or was it something that you fell into? And then what was that like to take that opportunity, to take that risk, really to expose yourself in a way that you hadn't before?
Yeah, good question. It was not something that I thought about doing, but I had lived in Georgia for a couple of years and worked at that summer camp I mentioned where I met my husband, and had moved back to Minnesota and was kind of in a limbo of where do I want to go? What should I do? I could work for another organization like I had been before. And ultimately a position at Children's Cancer Research Fund was available. And I really admired CCRF, our abbreviation, willingness and dedication to telling stories and to hearing what a patient and a family's story with childhood cancer is. And once I was able to learn more about their values, it was an organization that I saw myself fitting into very, very well. So I applied for a job and thankfully was able to join the team. And I've been at CCRF for just about 2.5 years now. And it's been a wonderful place to be able to work and advocate for survivors and advocate for better treatments for childhood cancer and help move the needle in whatever way I can.
Well, that's great. So
yeah. What about you, Sheri? Were you ever over cancer?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I agree with everything that you said, that it just becomes part of you. So it's not like you ever get over it. But I remember when I went back to counseling psychology grad school, and I took my health psychology class or whatever, and I thought, well, I don't want to do health psychology, very much like you. I'm just going to go be an intern at a low-income neighborhood near where we live, and not necessarily bring all my experience into it. And then I was working with some kids in East Palo Alto, and they were telling me stories about their life, as they do, as a support counseling person. And I mean, it was so far from my experience that I could not even imagine some of the hardships that they were going through. I remember this one young girl who was telling me how she was shot in church in the foot, because it, broke out into this sort of drug battle at the church. And I'm like, I can't even relate to this stuff. And so a little bit, I backed into it. So I thought, well, maybe I'll just do one internship in something where I thought I'm ready. It was probably at least 5-6 years after I was sick, but I said, I'm ready. I think I'll give it a try. And then when I was able, I never got into my own story. That wasn't my role. As a support group leader or whatever. But I think just knowing, when they sort of knew, they knew that I had had cancer. So I was one of the club, right? And they knew it wasn't like I went on and on about anything that really happened to me or my own feelings or anything, because I had long since processed that. But it was like a trust issue. It was sort of like that they were able to trust me in a different way than maybe somebody that was from the outside that had only been trained in supporting cancer patients. So never in a million years did I think I would still be doing it. I thought I was just doing my hours for licensure or whatever. I sure didn't think. And you know what? This is a funny story. So I married. You were talking about being in the paper, as was I. And maybe that's why we've always hit it off. I never realized that too. But I also live not necessarily in the community like you do, but you know, our family is more, I guess, in the limelight or the profile type thing. So most people, like there was nobody I had ever met in California that, I mean, at least a microscopic little Silicon Valley community that didn't know that I had been sick.
Yeah.
So how did I get out of it? You know, my husband happens to be French, and we moved to France, and
Yep.
suddenly
Au revoir.
everybody knew, unless
Yeah.
I told them. And I really liked that.
Yeah.
I really liked that I didn't come with an automatic history.
Yes.
And the thing that irritated me the most, I have to say, was like people putting me on a pedestal, because I didn't feel like I deserved to be on a pedestal, because, you know, I just dealt with what I had to deal with, just like everybody has to deal with what they have to deal with in life.
Yeah.
I didn't do anything special to earn this, you know, honor of being the, you know, amazing survivor that I am, you know, whatever just happened. And so yeah, I think when I was in France and could experience what it was like, that was my favorite part. Like people were like, oh my God, it must have been so amazing to live in Paris, and you must have been gone to museums, you must do all this wonderful stuff and go shopping. And yes, I did those things. And yes, I ate great food and drank great wine. I did all of that. I didn't know what it was about for me. The happy memories of Paris really came with getting to be myself and being who I wanted to be, away from the experience. So yeah, I guess that was a turning point to me. And I'm just noticing here, it doesn't look like anybody's asked questions yet, but we have time for that if anybody would like to post something. Otherwise, we'll you know, we'll just keep talking, but feel free to jump in there. So I'm wondering, as we're getting close to the hour here, do you have any strategies that you either share? I'm sure you must talk to a lot of cancer survivors, as do I, people in the thick of it that are still part of doing treatment. And do you have strategies that you share, and, you know, both with those in the thick of it and those that are survivors, that you'd like to share with our audience today?
Yeah, I think something that I learned from my mom when I was getting diagnosed, she was with me through every step of the process, and she was never afraid to ask questions. And I think when you're getting diagnosed and you're experiencing something so out of your realm of expertise or even experience, being able to ask questions is really important. So one way that I saw my mom advocate for me, and then how she taught me to advocate for myself, was being able to say the phrase, I don't know what that means, or can you explain what you just said in another way? And we primarily told that to doctors when they were explaining what was going on or what was happening next, or when nurses were coming into the room and saying, all right, we're going to change this. And just being able to ask why really helped me take back some control and some agency in what was going on. Of course, I don't think there may have been an opportunity for me to change that course, but just the knowledge of this is what's going on and this is why it's happening is really important to me, and it continues to be an important part of my life. I think anyone who knows me would say, yeah, she needs to know the why behind what's going on in order to feel like she's part of a discussion or part of the topic. So whether that is in an experience in health, a professional life, in your schooling or education, I think this is something that I learned when I was sick, and it was primarily from my mom.
That whole question, why me? I mean, a lot of times people say, well, that's just cancer patients that ask that question, why me? But, you know, now we're all in this COVID situation. A lot of people say, you know, why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? And for me, that's not like a negative question at all. It's a question of possibility. It's a question of saying, you know, why me has this look inside, and it's not just why me, but it's what's next, and how can we get there? It's just like in our game ShadowsEdge, there's the discovery. And when you're right, like in disruption or disillusionment, you can see that there's a little light at the end of the tunnel there, but you have absolutely no idea how to get there. And I think it's by asking us those tough questions that we find our path. And it's not even like a straight path at all, right? I mean, don't let me speak for you, but mine was like this. I mean, I don't know if yours was, and I could never have pictured what it was going to be. And I think it's not just cancer patients. I mean, I think anybody that's going through transition is going to ask that tough question: is why is this happening to me? And how do I get myself out of it? And it's okay to experiment. It's okay to try something on, see if it works. And if it doesn't work, change course. I mean, I know I did that several times, and to give ourselves permission to do that, to not have to have it all figured out. And I think that's a really, it's a hard, sometimes a hard thing to do, to give ourselves permission to do that. So one of the challenges, if I had to look back at all these years, I mean, we're talking a lot of years here for me. And I had to look at some things personally, other than the things that we've already talked about, some things that have made a difference to me and how I live my life. And sometimes it was so powerful to learn this, but which I'll tell you in a second, but at the same time, I'm like in a big regression right now. So I feel a little bit like a hypocrite in even saying this, but one of the things that I, when I was so challenged with such a short diagnosis, was I never thought there was enough time, like enough time to do what exactly, I don't know, but like I always have felt my entire life for 35 years that I don't have enough time. And I remember, and it causes me to do stupid stuff. It causes me to, to get irritated with people that are interrupting my time, for example. It causes me to rush and to have less quality time with whatever I'm doing at the time, whether with the people or whatever. And I think one thing that was interesting for me was I was in a support group once, not leading it, but actually in it. And they said, well, if that's your issue, why don't you just pretend? I mean, I know you don't believe it, but just pretend for a minute that there's as much time as you need. And how would you relax? How would you live your life differently? And I thought, oh my God, that's great. And when I take the time to think about that, and that I don't, it's amazing the positive changes that come with just trusting that that's just a belief that I hold, and it's not a hard and set fact.
Oh, that's brilliant, Sheri. It's a question that could reframe so much of my decision making as well. I noticed quickly in the chat we have a few questions that came in. So I'm going to read the first one, and Sheri, do you want to take maybe a stab, or I'm happy to as well. This first question says, what did your healthcare team do to support your emotional needs during and after treatment? What do you wish had been included in your care from the psychological perspective, both during and after treatment?
You can put that on me, huh? Or you're going to answer? So I think I'd say the people in my life, one thing that could have been different, not necessarily my medical team, would be I think to ask me how I was doing, but not with like a way that I was going to answer, I'm fine. I think that's sort of the thing. Like the nurses come in or whatever, they should say, how are you doing? How are we doing today? And I mean, at some point it gets kind of irritating because it's not really real. I think that the most important to me was when I realized when other people went through challenges, some of it was cancer, some of it was completely unhealth related, other challenges that they had. And when I could feel like it was okay to just be myself and to be real with people and whatever I was feeling. And I have to say I was pretty rough around the edges at first because I didn't really know how to express how I was feeling. And the things would come flinging out. So, I think the patience that people had as I learned to do that. Like I said, I can be in my regressions. Everybody can, especially when you get so far out from the situation. I think that patience, I think, is key. And what about you, Katrina? You want to answer that one or go to the next question?
I think I'm going to hop down to the next one. So this question is, you mentioned feeling sad to leave the hospital when you completed treatment. Did you ever feel like the hospital staff abandoned you after treatment, or did you seek contact with those staff members you became close to after treatment? Um, I would say no. I did not feel like the hospital staff abandoned me after I was treated. Thankfully, that wasn't my experience. For a while there, I was going back to the hospital on a monthly basis, and then it got gradually more and more. So now I just take yearly trips back. And for many of those years when we would go back, my mom and I, or maybe a couple siblings if they came, we would get dinner with one of my favorite PCAs. His name was Mike. And yeah, we would get dinner and catch up and just check in with each other. And then one other quick thing that I'll mention is I was actually at the same hospital I was treated at for another family emergency. And I was in line to buy a cup of coffee, and a woman from behind came up, and I just turned around to see who was standing behind me. And it was one of my nurses. And we had not seen each other in over a decade at that point. And I looked at her and I said, Kelly, is that you? And she said, Katrina, the one with the cabin? I have a cabin up north in northern Minnesota where her family also does. And she recognized me 10 years later with a full head of hair. I was bald when I was treated. So there's no way that she should have been able to recognize me, but she did. So I for sure felt like my hospital team and the group of people that worked with me deeply cared about me, and even remembered me 10 years later at a random coffee shop when I was visiting and was in town.
Well, we just have a few more minutes. I have another question here, which this slides into it perfectly, is what kind of advice would we give to medical professionals, wanting to support a family that just finished their active treatment phase and are going into survivorship? Do you have something you could say, or maybe even what CCRF does?
Yeah, I would say, I would ask the question to the family of what type of support systems do you have set up in place to continue to be supported outside of the hospital. So for me, that would look like a mental health resource. So are you part of a group, or do you have a therapist, or even a resource like ShadowsEdge? I know at CCRF, we provide the opportunity to tell stories, like I had mentioned. So even connecting them with a group like CCRF to be able to share their story and their experience with cancer, I think is a really empowering piece to take with you as you go. This is a huge part of your life, and a cancer diagnosis or any type of serious illness is a major part of your life. And to be able to learn how to live with this experience, and not even just live, but thrive and move forward in your life with this part of your story is critical, I think, to overall happiness and happiness.
Well, that's good. And I'll just say one final thing in closing here. Is another important thing that I learned, but it's related to that question, which is, it's okay to let the patients be a little bit selfish. I think we've all been through a lot. I think one of the things for me that I learned was to be a receiver. I had never actually done that. I was always a giver in my relationships, and to sit back and to help the patients or the family members to learn how to let somebody else take care of them in a way, and help them identify what those needs are, and what they can do for themselves to help them. And that's the kind of selfish part, to eat dessert first, so to speak, or to get those needs met. I think that's super important. And I wish we had time for more questions, but we're at the hour now. Lacey, did you have one more final question for us, or should we just wrap up?
We do have one more question from Facebook Live. I sent it to you just because I think I would mess that up reading that out loud.
Okay. Oh, you do.
It says, how did you know something was wrong, Lacey?
Yes.
Okay, so the question is, how did you know something was wrong, and how long did it take to get diagnosed? You were tired and weak a lot, and then fine other days. So I said, for me, the diagnosing process took a little bit of time. It was a gradual process of me starting to not feel better. And there's that phrase where you're like a frog in a boiling pot of water, and you don't really realize it's boiling, and it just gets hotter and hotter. And I would say that would be my experience as well. I started getting sick, but it was such a gradual experience that we didn't quite know what was going on, other than I wasn't feeling well. So it did take some time. I was, it did take a little bit of time, but thankfully the team of doctors that we were working with moved quickly, and we were able to get a diagnosis pretty quickly once we realized there was something more going on than just a really bad case of mono.
And I'm going to answer that one too, because for me, I was on the other end of the spectrum. It took me 16 years to be diagnosed, which wouldn't happen today because there's a lot better diagnostics. But I knew something was wrong with me, and I had classic brain tumor symptoms starting at age 8, and they changed over time. That's what was a confusing thing to everybody, is they changed over time. And so I was diagnosed with just about everything except a brain tumor, you know, from histamine sensitivity to school phobia to food allergies to having migraines to just about everything. And I think that the important thing is we know our bodies. And I'd just like to encourage anybody who's out there who knows that something's going on for them. And my mom also knew, and we constantly went to doctors and different kinds of sleep disorders. I mean, every kind of doctor you can imagine, until I finally was diagnosed by a lay person whose brother happened to have a brain tumor. And she said, you know, I think you need to go in and get a scan, and you need to do it this weekend. And that's how I was diagnosed. And I think that it's complicated to do these diagnoses. And I'll just say that because sometimes you have classic symptoms, sometimes you don't. And I think the stickiest of patients, you know, if they keep saying, you know, I have these needs, I have these needs, I have these needs, you know, eventually they'll get help. And in my particular case, it was absolutely, I feel, to my benefit that I was misdiagnosed all those years, even though I had to have a lot of headaches and everything else, because they knew what they were doing. More or less, by the time they treated me, a lot more advances than other people that I knew who had even lost siblings because they were treated really early on. So we're over time. So I'm going to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. And this talk we will have a link and we'll send out to you. And we'll also be able to circulate the link to all the people that couldn't join us today. So thank you, everyone. And we look forward to our next webinar in October, which will be on creative self-expression. So thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next month.